Well, today may be one of the most optimistic programs you've ever seen in a humanist freethinker environment. I learned about the speaker, Alan Jeskin, his writing name, who sent me a copy of his book along with a membership form to join the humanist community in Silicon Valley. And I eventually started reading the book, and I was overwhelmed by the depth and the breadth of what goes into it. So I think it's a read that will, I won't say blows your mind, it blew my mind, and I'm still in a glow from reading it. I won't say more about our speaker. I'll just let him speak for himself. Let's give Alan Jeskin a good hand. There's two books. This is the Reason's Fifth Dawning, The End of Religion, and his original book, Outgrowing God.
Right, thank you, Arthur. By way of introduction, again, my name is Alan Jeskin. A little bit of history. I'm a 21-year Navy veteran. I started my career as a nuclear engineer on submarines. After about 5 years of tooling around underwater, I decided to do something different, and I applied for Navy aviation. I wanted to fly jets for the Navy. I was fortunate. Can you hear me? I was fortunate enough to get that transition, and I flew jets for the last 15 years of my Navy career. My last job was commanding officer of a fighter squadron out of Lemoore, California. I retired, went to business school right here at Stanford, and then I got into to business, did operations and quality, and in my spare time I wrote these two books. So,
how old are you if you did so many
I will be 50 next month.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, I drink lots of water and work out, so. Okay, so thanks, Arthur, and the rest of the program committee for having me out here, and thank you all for sitting through my pitching of my book and some rather radical ideas you're going to hear this afternoon. So Reason's Fifth Dawning, The End of Religion, that's the name of my novel. It's basically a novel that chronicles the fictional, part true, story of several people who decide to get together, do some research in psychology, and figure out how to disabuse just about anyone from their religious beliefs. They form a foundation that successfully does this over a period of several years, and then they package this process into a blockbuster movie. Within a year of the release of that movie, religion globally is over. Now, some of you may think that that story is preposterous. I don't. I'm sure the first time somebody said, let's send a man to the moon, that idea was far more preposterous than the one I'm proposing today. Okay, so why end religion? Well, I think there are three main reasons. One, religious beliefs are untrue, and I don't think I have to convince anyone in this audience of that. When I was 15 years old, I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and personal Savior. And I viewed the world through a prism of faith that truly distorted reality. I thought I had an invisible friend that I could talk to. I thought that death was not the last thing that would happen to me, that after that I'd be immortal and live up in heaven with God, baby Jesus, all the angels, and all my Christian friends. I was delusional. Today I'm a humanist, a rationalist, and an atheist. But today billions of people walk around with these prisms of faith as they view reality, and it skews reality for them as well. I call these faith goggles. And as they walk around and view reality with these faith goggles, they see other people with different faiths and they want to kill them, perhaps. When these faith goggles are on, facts become invisible or unreal. Evolution, climate change, all those kinds of things, you can't see those until you bump into them and gash your head. So as we all walk through the halls of life, I think it would be much better for all of us if these folks could take off their faith goggles and we could all view reality with the untrammeled sight of logic. And that way, talk to one another, realize the true nature of reality, and have a much better chance of changing it for the better. Second reason, religion stifles progress. Religion tried to strangle science in its infancy and has been trying to continue to kill it or chip away at it ever since. Religion has been on the wrong side of history every time we've tried to expand individual freedoms, and we see it even today. So these two reasons alone should be enough to invalidate religion as an institution. But some might say, well, wait a minute. Religion has some great things. It gives us hope, transcendence. It acts as a conduit for fellowship, and there's no way to replace that. I say untrue. Religion is replaceable. When I look back at a time when I was a Christian, and I thought that all the hope and transcendence that I was getting was coming from a book of fairy tales or from some invisible man in the sky, I realize now that that invisible man in the sky was just an idea in my mind. It was a creation of my own imagination. Therefore, whatever hope or transcendence that I thought I was getting ultimately from this invisible deity was actually ultimately coming from me. And as I stand here with absolutely no belief in the supernatural, no belief that there's some cosmic consciousness that cares what we do when we're naked, I can tell you that I am just as fulfilled, just as happy, and experience just as much transcendence as I did when I thought baby Jesus was looking out for me. I find hope not in a book of fairy tales or belief that after death I have an everlasting party fest for all eternity. I find hope just looking at human history, looking at the power of our intellect, the depth of our empathy for one another, the resilience of our goodwill and our will to survive are all enough evidence to give me hope that we will continue to persevere. When I used to go to church to get transcendence and thought that transcendence only came from fellowship with Christians, I was wrong. Transcendence comes from looking out at the vastness of the universe, the intricacies of nature, and our extremely privileged place in both. Transcendence comes from witnessing excellence, the excellence of a world-class athlete or world-class performance, looking at the excellence in architecture. Transcendence comes from taking an afternoon and sharing ideas among like-minded people. So religion is replaceable. I talk more about some of these concepts in my first book, Outgrowing God, Moving Beyond Religion, and I have some of them back there for sale after the talk. So the next question then, after why end religion, of course, is, will religion ever end? As entrenched as religion is in our culture, can we ever be rid of it? Well, in the industrialized world, outside of the US, it's already happening. In places like Denmark and Sweden, the vast majority of people there are atheists. And if you want to measure their morality, say, against the US, they beat us hands down in any metric. Whether it's teenage pregnancy, drug use, corruption, the amount of charity per capita, they beat us hands down. So what about the US and the rest of the world? Could you possibly get religion out of the US? Really? I say yes, you can. The question is, how quickly? If you look at the percentage of people who claim no religious affiliation between 2009 and today, over those 5 years, that fraction has gone up from 15% to 20%, 1% each year. In my most pessimistic estimation of the end of religion, that trend will continue, and if you just kind of extrapolate 1% per year, starting at 20%, well, in 80 years, religion will be gone. But that's my most pessimistic view. My most optimistic view is that as that trend continues, as younger people become aware enough to recognize that religion is untrue and can be replaced, something else will happen. There will either be an event or series of events that will precipitate a marked decline of the belief in religion in our lifetime. If and when that happens, remember, you heard it here first. Okay. And if it doesn't, you can at least indulge in the fantasy by buying a copy of my book and reading just such a scenario in Reason's Fifth Dawning. So, I want to talk about the title, Reason's Fifth Dawning. The title begs two questions. The first, of course, is what is a dawning of reason? And the second, well, if this is the fifth one, what were the 4 preceding dawnings of reason? So I'll answer that very quickly here. So, if you measure human progress over time, from when humans first emerged on the evolutionary scene, modern humans, until today, that's about a 200,000-year span. If you measure human progress, the graph will look something like this. And when I say human progress, you can pick your proxy. Whether it's the likelihood that in your lifetime you will be chased down by a predator that's trying to eat you, or the likelihood that you won't get chased down by a predator that's trying to eat you, the graph would look like that. The likelihood that a woman over her childbearing years will experience either death herself or the death of her children, the likelihood that that doesn't happen will look like that graph. The likelihood that you will have all of your teeth by the time you're 30, or the likelihood that you won't have all your teeth by the time you're 30, looks like that. The per capita wealth of human beings across the globe, the graph looks like that. And if you look at that graph, there are 4 significant points on there. Of course, the beginning, right here, you see a nice steady increase in progress. Then you'll see these inflection points right here. That first one, about 3/4 of the way through the timeline, you'll see that the rate of human progress picked up. And then about 90% of the way through, you'll see that the rate picked up even more. And then very close to today, you'll see that that rate just shot through the roof. Each one of those points marks a time in human history when we developed some new and significant capability to use the greatest tool we ever had of increasing our quality of life, and that tool is reason. So I consider each of these points, the beginning, and each of these inflection points as a dawning of reason, and I'll step through each of those dawnings here. Reason's first dawning, the emergence of modern humans. The first time in all of evolution that you had somebody with a brain big enough to truly use reason like it's never been used before. That guy right there, that handsome fellow there, our great-great-grandfather to the times 10 to the 20th power. That guy right there with a more vertical forehead, larger cortex for higher thinking. He started a long progression, a long, nice, slow progression of human progress. Developed the mastery of fire, had art, developed fine tools, and most importantly, he developed language. Language, that rich medium in which we can develop more complex thoughts. We can exchange those thoughts with others. We can store those thoughts and build on them in successive generations, something no other species could do. For example, if you look at birds and how they live today, running around foraging for food, trying to evade predators, they haven't changed for 1 million years. And that's because they can't accumulate knowledge, store it, and then build on it. So that's what language does for us. And because of that language, once we had the full development of language, by 50,000 years ago, we had reason's second dawning with that rich medium that we fully developed called language. Because of that, we went from being small bands of hunter-gatherers to becoming increasingly larger bands of communicative hunter-gatherers who were then able to find the wherewithal to get up out of Southeast Africa and migrate all through Asia, Europe, the Americas, and Australia. And as we did so, we created these settlements with even larger groups of people. And once we had those larger groups of people, we developed agriculture. And so instead of spending all our time running around trying to hunt down or forage for food, we said, hey, let's just catch a couple animals, breed them, keep them in our backyard, and grab one of them every time we're hungry. So what that did for us is it gave us a lot more time to think. We also had, because we're bigger groups of people now, division of labor. So instead of being a jack of all trades in a band of 10 people or so where I got to be able to hunt and dig up some roots and sew my own clothes, you now had people who could just sit and concentrate on one small sliver of our knowledge base and develop it. And because of that, those settlements led to reason's third dawning. 10,000 years ago, the emergence of civilization. Those settlements went into bigger and bigger villages, cities, nations, empires. Now we had the collective of not just a few hundred people, but thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people all contributing to the advancement of knowledge. And that's why we got these grand new advancements in technology: metal tools, wheel, paper, gunpowder, clock, printing press, telescope. We also developed governments and laws. Now, even though reason was becoming a greater part of our life, and because of that you see that the rate of human progress increased, we also created formal religion. So all of the folklore and mythology that we had, we crystallized it, made it grander. We created these huge institutions with all their deities. And it became a very powerful force that was actually acting against reason. So it's pretty ironic that through reason we developed religion, and then religion came up to kind of act against reason. And whenever reason and religion came into contact and clashed during this period, religion always won. And that's why the Mayans, every so often, would go and grab some unsuspecting Mesoamerican, lay him out, slit open his abdomen, reach in, grab his still beating heart, and offer it up to the plumed serpent god Kukulkan. Or, in medieval Europe, if people like Giordano Bruno had the temerity to suggest that Christ was not divine or that there were other worlds out there, that they would take him, strip him naked, gag him, bound him, and roast him over an open fire in 1600 in a courtyard in Rome. So something then changed, where during this period, religion had primacy over reason. At some point, 300 or so years ago, a slew of intellectual giants brought about reason's fourth dawning. People like John Locke, Immanuel Kant, Thomas Jefferson proposed that, hey, wait a minute, maybe reason is actually a better way of exploring and understanding reality and of setting the boundaries for morality, how we treat each other. And they brought about the Enlightenment. That was reason's fourth dawning. They proposed that reason should have primacy over faith, that thinking should have primacy over believing, skepticism over credulity, facts over superstition, science over mythology, discovery over dogma, individual well-being over obedience to the church, individual justice over the divine right of kings to enslave the masses, freedom over tyranny. And because of that primacy of reason over faith, you can see here that progress went through the roof. Humanity progressed more in the last 300 years than it did over the previous 200,000 once reason was given primacy over faith. It spawned the American and French revolutions, where we learned that, hey, let's have civil government that's based on democracy and individual freedom and pursuit of happiness. We had the scientific revolution, where every endeavor of science, physics, chemistry, medicine, changed our world for the better. Prior to this, epidemics like smallpox would wipe out entire civilizations, and all we did was watch, pray, and die. After this, we immunize ourselves from it. How many of you here in your day-to-day lives worry about smallpox or rubella, yellow fever? Probably none of you. Then came along the Industrial Revolution, where we harnessed the power of fuel and physics to create machines that could do in a single day what it took 10,000 slaves to do in a month. That increased the wealth of individuals across the globe by a factor of 10, 20, 100. And then, of course, more recently, the information age, where the development of the PC and the internet allows us to access in an instant almost the entire catalog of human knowledge. Now, the question I have is, all of that development that's happened in the last 300 years, because we put reason over faith. If you look around the world today, how many people truly embrace and internalize the idea that reason has primacy over faith? I say it's probably 10, maybe 20%. Most people give their faith primacy over reason. Now, if we developed this much in the last 300 years with only 2 or 20% of our population truly embracing this philosophy, what will happen when 40, 60, 80% of the human population embrace that idea? The next question I have is, what is actually stopping the vast majority of people from embracing the power, the true power of reason in discovering our universe and in setting rules for how we behave towards one another? The single greatest impediment to that happening is religion. And with the end of religion, I believe we have an opportunity to have the vast majority of people embrace the primacy of reason. And once that happens, I believe the pace of human progress will make the last 300 years look like child's play. Okay. So I guess you guys can see that I'm definitely an optimist. Now I'm going to take the next 15 minutes or so and read an excerpt from my book. The book is basically a story of several people who get together and figure out how to end faith, like I said, and they actually are successful. But the interesting part of the book is really the story of how they do that. So the excerpt I'm going to read is a setting in a television studio where there's a nationally televised debate between one of the characters. His name is Eric Noble. And if you look sort of at a bird's eye view of this table, debate table, Eric Noble, this character, is a retired Navy pilot who writes a book called Outgrowing God and then goes on to lead a foundation that figures out how to end religion. He's debating today Reverend Burris Newkirk, who is a pastor of the second largest church in the United States, and its church is based in Texas. So if you want to picture this character, picture a cross between Jerry Falwell and Boss Hogg from Dukes of Hazzard, and that's pretty much him. And you've got Imam Hamza, who is a Sunni Muslim cleric from Pakistan. And then they have those three guys representing Islam, Christianity, and humanism. And then the moderator, her name is Maddie Richards. So I'm going to pick up the story where Maddie is introducing has introduced the debaters, and she's kicking off the debate. Yeah, we'll grab this. All right. So this is Maddie Richards speaking now. Gentlemen, I'll put the ball in play, but once that's done, I'll step back and allow a freewheeling discussion. We have a lot to discuss, so let's get right to it. I'll start with you, Reverend. Many people can understand how radical Islam could be seen as one of the biggest threats to the security of this country. You say, however, that Islam in general and atheism are the biggest threats to Christian America. Given that Muslims account for less than 1% of the US population and atheists less than 5%, how do they threaten Christian America? And tell us what you mean by Christian America. Newkirk smiled broadly and said, "Thank you for the question, Maddie, and thank you for having me on your show. This is my 9th appearance in the last 5 years, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Let me address the last part of your question first. People can question whether this is a Christian nation as much as they want, but for me, the answer is clear. This country was founded on Christian principles by Christian men, and ever since then it's been led by Christian leaders who were elected by citizens who were and are mostly Christian. This country has been, and by the grace of Almighty God, always will be, a Christian nation. All Christian Americans believe this, but many feel it's not politically correct to say it out loud. I don't suffer from that affliction. Now, to answer the first part of your question, I'll start with Islam. With all due respect to Mr. Hamza here, Islam can be a religion of peace, but only between Muslims of the same stripe. Sunnis are peaceful with Sunnis, Shias are peaceful with Shias. For interactions outside of a given sect, Islam is clearly a religion of conquest, intolerance, and violence. This is perfectly illustrated by the fact that Muslims are less than 1% of the US population, but they have been responsible for 100% of the terrorist attacks in this country in the last 15 years. Muslims also believe that Islam is not limited to religion, but should cover civil law and political governance. They want to see Sharia law and Islamic political systems replace our Christian laws and our Christian democracy. Now that is a threat. Now let me address atheism. Maddie interrupted. Before you go there, Reverend, let's have Imam Hamza respond to your characterization of Islam. Imam? Hamza was smiling, but it appeared forced. Thank you, Maddie. First of all, Islam is a religion of peace. The vast majority of Muslims around the world live in harmony with people of other religions. Second, Muslims have no intention of trying to implement Sharia here in the United States. That is just rubbish. American Muslims are happy to live under the US Constitution, which is not a Christian constitution, but a secular one, the last time I checked. Third, it is true that people who called themselves Muslims were responsible for terrorist attacks, but they were not true Muslims. They were radicals who distorted Islam to justify their own evil purposes. Muslims should not be judged by the actions of these people. And finally, there are no soldiers from Muslim countries patrolling US neighborhoods in tanks and armored vehicles. There are no drones from Muslim countries dropping bombs on US citizens in their homes. There are no US citizens being held in Muslim-controlled prisons for over 10 years without being charged with a crime. If any of this was to happen, I think a few radicals from the US would find their way over to Muslim countries and commit terrorist attacks in the name of Christianity. If that happened, it would be unfair to label Christianity as a violent religion based on the actions of these self-proclaimed Christians. It is unfair to do that with Muslims today. Newkirk responded, "I'm sorry, but Islam is a violent religion, and it always has been. Islam was founded by Muhammad, an illiterate warlord, polygamist, and pedophile who rose to power through his bloody conquest of Arabia. Islam spread through Asia and parts of Europe through bloody conquest. Today, all throughout the Islamic world, Muslims are killing other Muslims, killing Hindus, and killing Christians. Muslims are murdering people who write books they don't like and who draw cartoons they don't like. Muslims are strapping bombs to men, women, and children to blow up other Muslim men, women, and children. Muslims behead people for converting to Christianity and stone women because they were raped. Muslims shoot little girls in the face because they want to go to school. Muslims preside over repressive totalitarian regimes that do not tolerate dissent and who vow to annihilate Israel. I'm sorry, but you cannot claim that the millions of people responsible for all this violence are not true Muslims. I think a lot of them would say you're the one who has sold out to the Christian West and is not the true Muslim. I'm sorry, but Islam is not a religion of peace." Noble was impressed by Newkirk's scathing indictment of Islam. He was surprised that he agreed with much of what the Reverend had just said. The thought of agreeing with Newkirk on anything made Noble cringe. Noble also admired Newkirk's put-down of Muhammad, recognizing it was a deliberate attempt to push the imam beyond the bounds of civility. Noble thought it was brilliant and fully expected it to work. Insulting Muhammad would guarantee a hot response. Illiterate, warlord, polygamist, and pedophile? Priceless. Now fasten seatbelts. Hamza's forced smile was gone and was replaced by pursed lips pinched into a tight slit. Angry furrows creased the skin between his eyebrows as they sank and pressed together. His face was dark with rage. Hamza said in a raised voice, "I do not see why you have to be disrespectful. We can discuss our differences, but you don't have to be disrespectful." Newkirk reached over and touched the imam's sleeve in a patronizing gesture of sympathy and said, "I'm sorry, but I don't see how I was being disrespectful. I was just stating facts. Let's see, I said Muhammad was illiterate, and he was. He didn't write the Quran. His followers did. In fact, you Muslims trumpet the fact that Muhammad was illiterate as proof that he was a messenger of God. I said he was a warlord, and he was. He led his tribe in battle against the Meccans. I said he was a polygamist, and he was. He had 12 wives and multiple concubines. And finally, I said he was a pedophile, and he was. Do you disagree?" Hamza shouted, "You will not insult the Prophet Abu al-Qasim Muhammad ibn Abd Allah, peace be unto him. You are distorting his legacy and mocking Islam. That is unacceptable behavior from someone who claims to be a man of God." Newkirk said calmly, "I didn't understand everything you just said, but is it the pedophile charge that got you all riled up? I would hate to get that wrong and have that be a sore point between us. So let's clear that up right now. as a student of the Hadith, can you tell us how old Muhammad was when he married his third wife, Aisha? Hamza, now glowering, said, I don't see the relevance of that question. Newkirk said, I'll help you out. Muhammad was 50 and Aisha was 6. Now, I know back in Muhammad's day, it was common for Arabs to marry prepubescent girls, but 6 is a bit green, even by Muslim standards, isn't it? Hamza shook his head and said, if you knew anything about Arab tradition in the 7th century, you would know that just because Aisha was 6 when she was betrothed to the Prophet, peace be unto him, that does not mean they had sex. In fact, Aisha continued to live with her parents until she was old enough. Don't try to twist the story and make it disgusting. You should be better than that. Newkirk said, I apologize if I gave the impression that Muhammad had sex with a 6-year-old. Can you tell us how old Aisha was when Muhammad, peace be unto him, finally consummated his marriage with her? Hamza extended his hand towards Maddie with his palm up and asked, are you going to allow this kind of talk from your guests? Maddie, surprised by the question, replied, well, yes, he's just asking a question. I don't see the problem. Newkirk continued, Aisha was 9 years old when Muhammad, peace be unto him, brought her into his bed. I don't know how you Muslims feel about that sort of thing, but in our Christian society, we lock people like that up, label them as sex offenders, and don't allow them within 100 yards of schools and playgrounds. Hamza stood up and began taking off his lapel mic. As he did, Newkirk smiled and asked, is it something I said? Maddie interjected, all right, gentlemen, let's pause here and we can continue on the other side of the commercial break. So at this point, Imam Hamza decides to leave. All right. So Hamza walked off the set, blowing past the producer who was trying to convince him to stay. Once the cameras were cut, Maddie said to Newkirk, I thought you said you were going to behave. Newkirk said, what did I do? Everything I said was true. You can't blame me if the imam has thin skin. Newkirk looked across the table and asked, Eric, you don't have thin skin, do you? Noble considered the question for a moment and said, not that thin. After a few minutes, taping resumed and Maddie opened the next segment. Welcome back to Counterpoint. I'm here with the Reverend Burris Newkirk and Mr. Eric Noble. Imam Saeed Hamza was here earlier, but after a spirited discussion with Reverend Newkirk, the Imam decided to leave the set. All right, back to the issues. Reverend, you explained that you thought Islam was a violent religion and a threat to what you called Christian America. Tell us why you think atheism is a threat as well. Newkirk said, gladly. Ever since 9/11, 15 years ago, a new and aggressive strain of atheism has arisen. The new atheists, as they are called, use Islamic terrorism as the justification for their war against all religions. Instead of focusing their efforts on the true threat, which is Islam, they take a shotgun approach and target all religious faith, wherever they find it. What makes these folks especially dangerous is that they want to turn America into a godless society. They want to replace our traditional Christian values and way of life with secular humanism. History teaches us that atheist societies have been the most brutal and repressive, and atheist leaders like Mao, Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, and Kim Jong-il killed more people than any other leaders in the history of mankind. The new atheists want to lead us down that path, and they pose a threat to Christian America that is second only to Islam. Maddie turned to Noble and said, Mr. Noble, I'm sure you would like to respond. Noble considered all of the specific issues and charges Newkirk had brought up that needed rebutting, and, as Noble always did, decided he needed to address the big picture first. Thanks, Maddie. Before I respond directly to Reverend Newkirk's specific assertions, I'd like to frame this debate in terms of the fundamentals. Thousands of years of human history demonstrate that gods are imaginary and exist only in the minds of their believers. The good Reverend believes his particular God is the single exception to history. He would agree that Vishnu, Brahma, Athena, Thor, and tens of thousands of other gods worshipped by billions of people throughout history were imaginary. He would agree that these gods were created by ancient people based on ignorance, fear, dreams, delusions, wishful thinking, and in some cases, outright lies. He would agree that as a rule, people create gods. But for Reverend Newkirk, Yahweh, the Bronze Age warrior sky god of a tribe of nomadic Canaanites, is the one grand exception to this rule. And how does he know Yahweh is the one grand exception? He has a book that tells him so. How does he know he can trust the information in this book? Well, the book itself claims the information inside it is valid. When was the book written? Long before there was much distinction between superstition and fact. Who wrote the book? According to scholars, at least 20 men, half of whom are unknown or the subject of debate. In every case, the authors of this book relay hearsay information about private conversations with the only God in human history that was not imaginary. This is the nature of the information that serves as the foundation of the Reverend's faith. His worldview is informed by ancient unknown storytellers who claim, among other things, that rain comes from an ocean above the sky, that people once lived for more than 900 years, that God prefers penises without foreskins, unicorns exist, and Jesus was going to come back to earth before the end of the 1st century. Let's keep all of this in mind as we move into the specifics of the debate. I'll be happy to address the Reverend's comments directly now, if we have time. And it goes on where he pretty much demolishes the Reverend, but I'll stop there for questions. Yes,
okay, so
yeah, go ahead.
All right, we're going to get started with questions, but we're going to do something a little bit different. The last several forums, there's been more questions than we can get to. So what I'm going to try to do, I can't promise I'm going to get this right, but we would really like to let people who have not asked a question yet be closer to the front of these numbers. So I'm going to try to remember who's asked a question before, and if you haven't, I'm going to try to give you a number first. So if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand, and I'm going to pass out the numbers, and we'll go through. So if you get, I'm sorry, you're going to be number 1 as soon as I get done with this. You'll be number 2. And I'll keep giving these out. And if you, as the Q&A goes on, go ahead and raise your hand. And we'll also, oh, we've got the basket started. Great. Okay, there you go.
Thank you very much. That was very informing and very interesting. But my problem is, how do you react to the fact that most people would never vote for an atheist, even if he agrees politically with their beliefs? And most rich and powerful people in this country are very religious. I'm a 3rd-generation atheist, and I'm from Europe originally. And in Europe, if I say to people I don't believe in God, they think I'm wrong, but they don't think I'm evil. Here people think that I'm evil and I have no morals if I'm an atheist. How do you respond to all that?
Okay, you're basically stating the problem, which is that because most people are religious, they have these views. And so that will change once you reduce the fraction of people who have religious beliefs and the number of people who are in the public sphere who feel liberated to come out and say, hey, I have no belief in God. Once people see these folks, recognize that they're not evil demons, I think that'll start to change. But again, it all goes back to the fundamental issue that we have to get rid of religion before all those kinds of misperceptions can change. And I think getting rid of religion is, to me, it's a process. How many people in here were born-again Christians prior to becoming an atheist? You got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So that alone informs me, and should inform you, that it can be done. Right? There's some process that very religious people go through. It usually involves education and learning about their religion or learning about the scripture that they base their religion on. But there is a process of introspection, of asking hard questions of oneself, to slowly sort of climb your way out of that intellectual morass and get to the point where you realize, okay, all the stuff I believed before was just complete nonsense. And most people sort of do that on their own over a period of many, many years. But it is a process. And if you get the right people and the right amount of resources, just like with anything else, once you identify the process, boil it down to its essence, and hone it so that it works in clinical trials, actually, I'm convinced that you can do with this process what people have done with other processes and get it to the point where it works, and works effectively, and works very rapidly. And so just a matter of getting the right people, the right resources together, and make a focused effort to do that. I think we kind of, you know, we as humanists and atheists and other secular organizations, we sort of are fighting the symptoms. We're not fighting the root cause. I don't know that you have a concerted effort of people to really come right out and boldly say, you know what, we're going to go after the source, the actual source of all these bad ideas. And that's religion. And go after it, and go after it hard. And I think we can do that. And once that happens, then I think you'll start to dismantle religion from its base, and then just comes crumbling down after that. Right now, we're sort of fighting out at the periphery, but the real source of all this is not really truly being attacked, and that needs to change.
As a third-generation atheist born here, and over the last few years of always wearing my atheist on my sleeve, I've always found people sometimes being a little bit uncomfortable, but I've never gotten anybody in my face. Also, I think that you should be a little more positive. The way I look at the whole continent of Europe is basically a secular continent. What we need to do is to vote for secular humanist in our political system. We have people in 500 people or so that run our country. There's many of them there. There are the positions that stop reason. So the answer is to start voting the atheists in.
Yeah, I agree with you, but again, I don't think our numbers lend themselves to being able to vote in secularists. So again, I think you have to kind of go a little bit deeper than that, more fundamental than that, and actually get people to become secular, thereby having more votes, thereby getting more people into positions of power to change things and make the country more secular. But as it stands, I don't think we have the numbers to really make a big shift in the political landscape. Yes.
So, a question, but a quick explanation of what the question is. I think beliefs of faith, I think there are two very different ones that we categorize under supernatural beliefs. And the first one is like Jesus walking on water, Jesus turning water into wine, whatever, all those things, the earth being at the center of the universe. They are, well, I wouldn't call them supernatural beliefs, I'd actually call them false natural beliefs. Correct. They clearly interfere with science, they clearly stifle progress. Right. And then there's true supernatural beliefs, like I have a soul and it goes to heaven, and I'm. So the first one, I would argue, are ones that people don't believe anyway. Nobody goes out and comes back from goes and gets water from Safeway for a dinner party and turns into wine. No Christian does that. Right. So people don't believe them anyway. And if they do, they need to be fought. The second one are very emotional, right? If you want to remove that one, people have to accept their son's soul, if their son passed away, is not in heaven. They're not going to meet them. It's just a memory in their mind now. So I think the second one is less damaging, those sort of pure supernatural beliefs, to humanists and to atheists, and in general, they don't interfere with the progress of science. They're much more difficult to remove. They're much more painful for people emotionally to let go of. So shouldn't we focus on the first? Aren't we already have a great deal of success at removing beliefs in the first? And don't you think we need to separate those two out? And they're going to be very different time frames in terms of eradicating one versus the other, and very different in terms of the importance of achieving that.
Yeah, I agree that you do have different kinds of faith. Some are more directly harmful to our getting along than others. And I think that there are some beliefs, for example, that, okay, I will somehow be reunited with my long-lost grandmother in heaven, and that makes you feel good. And so the temptation is to say that, well, that's okay. That doesn't hurt anybody. Here's the problem, though. If you draw concentric circles of faith, and at the very center, the bullseye, are the true believers, the people who actually take the scripture as it was intended as fact, right? The ideologues, the people who say, hey, the religion is based on this, we must believe it because it comes from God. And that's an unassailable fact we have to address. On the periphery of that are the folks that are, okay, a little less aggressive, but they go to church on Sundays and they, do fellowship and all that kind of thing, and they're there, and they don't necessarily believe that, you should go out and be in people's faces on this stuff, or even if they're Muslims, we shouldn't actually kill people who are apostates. Then on a further out concentric ring on that is people who just kind of, okay, well, there's something else out there. I'm not sure I really believe in true religion, but I believe there's something out there, and there will be some way my consciousness reconstitutes itself somewhere in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, clearly as you move in towards the center, you get more harmful beliefs. But here's the problem. The center is protected by the concentric rings outside. Once somebody says, hey, there is truth to the Bible, there is some truth. It's not really, literally true, but it has some truth to it. You then give legitimacy to the people who say, it's all true. In fact, what it is you have this bitter essence of religion that has somehow been diluted and sweetened to make it palatable to our modern sense of secular morality. But man, if you ever take the time to read the Bible or the Quran, it is a bitter essence. And by sort of softening that stuff, I think you're giving some cover to the folks who really believe it. Now, the one thing that religion can offer that I don't think there's any secular equivalent to is this whole idea of immortality. I think there's a secular version for all other forms of transcendence and hope. You can get that. You can get that, and you can get it rather easily. That's the one thing we can't offer. So, if people don't want to give that up, well, they can have it. But I think it naturally falls away once you go ahead and take out the root of the problem. You take out that bitter essence, and you show that there is, in fact, nothing to the Bible. There's nothing true about it. I think people will automatically kind of say, well, okay, I do only have 60, 70, 80 years of consciousness, and after that, that's it. But I think we also need to ask the question, is not 70 years of this wondrous thing called consciousness that allows us to interact in this world, is that truly not enough? Is it not enough? Not if you're 70. Not if you're 70. Well, hey, I mean, we just have to come to the sober realization that, hey, we've had a great run. And it was wonderful. And that actually, what that forces us to do is to make sure that those 70 or 80 years is the best as it can be, and that we maximize human happiness, our own and others around us. And I think it actually puts more focus on the here and now, and ensuring that we do whatever it takes to make the here and now as great as possible and pass it on to generations after us. And you know, you sort of go to your death knowing that the people you love and care about so much, your kids, that they will live in a better world. I think it's enough. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I think there's one aspect of religion that really needs to be challenged, because I think some religious people have a difference about whether their religion is based on reason or on faith. There's some people who claim, and in fact the Catholic Church will claim, it's based on reason. But there are some people who believe that it's virtuous to believe in something when there's no evidence for it and when it's logically contradictory. So you can't really even have a rational argument with them. So they believe it on faith, and the religious leaders encourage that. It's good to have faith, and so you could have faith that your race is better than someone else's race. You could have faith that it's a good idea to kill people who don't agree with you. Now you can make logical arguments, no, but that's their faith. In fact, some Christians who use reason might suggest, well, it's harmless to have faith, so what? What difference does it make? So they believe something when there's no reason. But it's a serious problem. So I think this is the fact that someone believes in God or whatever, that's not your big problem. So and there are actually scientists who are religious, like Isaac Newton was a Christian. Mm-hmm. I was raised as a Catholic. I never did accept the idea that my religion should be based on blind faith. I thought I wanted my religion to be reasonable. And when I was in college, I got into arguments with atheists. And, well, see, that was my downfall, because I wanted it to be reasonable, and I was losing the arguments against atheists. So I eventually became an atheist myself. See? But there's other people who say they won't do that because it's blind faith. They just don't want to give it up.
Right.
So I think what we should be challenging is the whole idea that it's virtuous to have blind faith. That's the big thing, I think.
And I agree with you. And in fact, that is one of the central points of attack when going after religion, is going after sort of the ontology of religion, of actually asking the question, is faith a reasonable means for acquiring truth? And the answer is no, but you're exactly right. And you need to demonstrate how using faith is either useless or harmful in acquiring knowledge or comporting yourself. And there are just thousands of examples throughout history that demonstrate that. And I think by just bringing up a few of them, you can demonstrate to somebody that faith is not a reasonable method for either understanding the world or comporting your life around. And you can, Christianity, for example. So when I hear people debate Christians, I wonder why it is that the atheist has on his side history, logic, common sense, and reason, and the Christian has only faith and the book of fairy tales, and yet in most instances the debate ends up being some sort of muddy draw. If you step back and just look at the Christian religion and you paint it in its true view, you can give a simple example of how it is not only fantastic and unbelievable, but it is in fact one of the most immoral constructs ever created in human history. Consider this: two people. On one side, Mahatma Gandhi, who died a Hindu, never accepted the divinity of Jesus, lived his entire life trying to better his people. On the other side, you have a lifelong pedophile and murderer of children who maybe killed 20, 30 children. Mahatma Gandhi, he dies, and in the Christian construct of morality, he goes and burns in hell for 500 trillion years, only a fraction of eternity there. On the other hand, this murderer who goes to his deathbed and accepts the fantastic idea that God came down as his own son, orchestrated his own death to appease his own anger at the fact that the people he alone was responsible for creating don't do what he tells them to do. This person accepts that whistling vortex of implausibility, and he gets to go and live in heaven for all eternity with some of the very children that he sent there. Now, if you can find for me a less moral construct than that, I'm all ears. But yeah, but faith, again, back to your point, faith, you have to attack the whole idea that faith is any rational means or valid means of either constructing morality or viewing the world. And yes, you have to attack the idea that faith is a virtue in order to get rid of religion. Yes.
All right, so we have several more people who had questions, but lunch is ready, so I'm going to escort Alan to the food table, and everyone who has questions still, join him at the speaker table, and let's join me in thanking him for this talk.